Okay, welcome again to the Daily Huddle, and let's make sure that I have my video on. Oh, here we go. Okay, welcome to the Daily Huddle. I'm your host, Dr. Monikah Ogando. We are going to be talking today about, when is I create my life and free will, spiritual bypass for fault and blame. And so let me take this off so I can really look at you. Let's make some distinctions first, and let's make sure that we have some definitions and that we have checked our assumptions first, right? So the first distinction that I want to make is that I create my life is really about how you experience life, not necessarily the circumstances themselves, right? When we are born into a family of origin. We are born into a particular set of circumstances, whether it be socioeconomic, political, geographic, all manner of things that are just kind of like in the water already. And you didn't create that. You stepped into it. Now, an argument can be made, and I have certainly made this argument, that on a soul level, you made those choices. You chose those parents. You chose those particular set of circumstances so that they would help to accelerate your path, your evolution, your ascension, your self-mastery, your soul growth, et cetera, et cetera. And I still stand by that. I still make that argument and I still stand by that. That is one of my beliefs. However, the conversation around I create my life, therefore these circumstances are mine. I generated these circumstances. That's where we want to check for blame and fault versus authorship. Big difference. And the authorship comes from your own experience of it, right? Let me give you a perfect example of this. Some of you have siblings that you grew up with, and these siblings grew up in the same house with the same parents. Put a 1 in the chat if that's true. You have siblings and you all grew up with the same caregivers or parents or whatever. Right. However, when you tell the story of a particular thing that happened in childhood, how many of you have ever experienced that you have a different story than your sister or your brother? Same parents, same household, same event, but you have a different memory of it. You have a different experience of it. This is where your consciousness comes in. Because you are a different consciousness than your brother or your sister, then you filter circumstances and people and experiences differently, and therefore you have a different memory of it, right? And so what I want to challenge you to do with this question of, when does I create my life and free will become blame and fault, is, does it leave you empowered or curious at the very least? Or does it leave you feeling discouraged, disempowered, almost resigned to crap? Because when I think of I create my life, I have a visual in my mind of like the pen is in my hand, right? That I can write this script differently. I can author a different ending, or at the very least, a very different experience for me, even if I can't change particular things. However, fault and blame leave you feeling like it's not up to you, and you just gotta take your dibs, right? So I want to hear from you. Where do you stand with this I create my life? Where do you see your authorship of your own life? And I don't want platitudes, okay? Let's roll up our sleeves and get some work done in here as to how and when you experience yourself as the author of your life versus when you experience yourself at the effect of something outside of you. Let's hear it. Who wants to?
Well, Doc, I find that I grapple with that a lot because quite often I don't want to, when I look at some circumstances that show up in my life, I don't
Yeah,
necessarily want to be the one to take authorship for that.
right,
You know, I want to say, nah, that was somebody else's fault. I want to blame. And I find that happens, that's a constant thing that I have to always be careful of. That kind of voice, that blaming voice is like always there. It's always like I gotta speak to and against that blaming voice.
right,
Because it's present, so
right. Yeah.
yeah.
And so let me ask you something. Do you find that when you're tempted to evade
Ownership.
ownership,
Hmm.
it's because you're trying to not be a bad person or be wrong or take the blame or fault for something?
And not wanting to take the blame and the fault for something, being wrong, not wanting to be wrong. Usually, I would say it's that.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so here's the creak in the door for this, because when we start to explore how we think and how we
Doc, you're frozen right now. I know you may not know it. Yeah, Doc is he's frozen right now. Well, what do we want to keep the conversation going until she gets back? Uh-oh. Yeah. I think she signed off to come back on. I believe that's what she's doing now. Yeah. There she is. Hey Doc. Hey Doc. There you go. Yeah, we just lost you. We lost you for a couple of minutes.
but I see snow flurries outside my window, so maybe that interrupted some of our connection. But anyway, so when you hear yourself talking about wrong or bad, etc., you already know you are in the domain of the ego. Not
Mhm.
to say that that's quote unquote bad to be in the domain of the ego, but just know that it's a different language. Just know that it has different metrics for success and failure. And so when you are facing a challenge like that, in the Bible and in other sacred scriptures, the messianic character in the Bible, it's Jesus. In the Quran, it's Muhammad. In the Upanishads and so forth, you see a lot of Buddha, et cetera, et cetera. Right? So in every tradition, there's a Christ figure, there's a messianic figure. And in the Bible specifically, there's a place where Jesus asks Peter, who represents metaphysically the faith faculty, he says, "Who do you say that I am?" And the faith faculty, in this case, Peter says, "You are the Son of the living God." And so life is always asking us to be self-determinant. Who do you say you are? Because who you are has already been created by your creator, your divine creator, right? So your identity is not up to you. That's already been handled. But who you say you are is up to you. That's the constant state of self-authorship, of creation. And so if you are saying, "I don't want to be wrong," it presupposes you're wrong, and now you're just trying to run away from it. And if you're presupposing that you're wrong, then you are already assuming and revealing that you're operating from ego and not from higher self. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Right?
Yeah.
And so when you check your language, there's a philosopher, a Chilean philosopher, his name is Fernando Flores, and he used to say, language is the house of being. And what he meant by that was that when you give something language, in essence, you are creating it by virtue of language. You're giving it beingness. That's why in Alaska, the indigenous people in Alaska have dozens of names for snow, and we only have one because they need those nuances and those specifics, right? In the Romance languages, there are at least 3 different words for love: cariño, querer, amar, right? But in Anglo-Saxon languages, there's only one. And in the Chinese language, there's none. You can have respect, you can have honor, but there's no word for love in the Chinese language. And so your languaging is a hint as to where you're standing. And when you're standing in fault and blame, you already know that you're standing in the domain of the ego. And when you understand that, when you are aware of that, you can make a different choice, because awareness breeds choices. And if you need to sit in the ego for a moment so you can get it out, so that you can throw a little tantrum, so you can like offshoot some energy, that's fine. The ego's not a bad thing to do. Don't beat yourself up. Don't be wrong about being wrong, because that's a clever spiral of the ego as well. However, when you are getting yourself into awareness, then you can, in the authoring of your own experience, decide, I'm sitting in my ego right now because I need to offshoot some energy. I do feel bad and wrong. I do experience some guilt, et cetera, et cetera. So let me just talk it out. Let me just get it out, so that then out of that place of clearing, I can then make a different choice because I'm aware that this is what I'm doing. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I'd love to hear from anybody else. Where do you sometimes go to bad and wrong, fault and blame, as opposed to authorship and creating your experience? Thank goodness for the mute button. Who else has something? Talk to me. Come and talk to me. Yes.
See, I'm creating my own experience. You like it? So, so for me, I'm all the time in huddles like this or with groups. So I'm trying to, create, my experience and what I'm doing through other people to a large extent. But, I gauge kind of, the role I can play based on the responses I get in other groups, so it's all about discernment for me, in terms of, my higher calling and where people share with me what they recognize in me, and it confirms for me, what I'm interested in. So I do a lot of nonprofit work, philanthropic work, hanging with do-gooders, empowering people with the idea of power of one. And, so my quest is to be the example of that, to wake up every day and to, live this thing that we talk about with the Motivation Readers Mastermind Network. What the mind can conceive and believe, it will achieve. And there's a lot of things I see in groups or with other individuals that, like the saboteur,
Right.
that were like speaking into things like achieving world peace, and things that, for all of time for humankind, we've spoken into our collective reality that certain things are impossible. So that's basically what, I try to come in and, go for the obnoxious, the ridiculous, the seemingly unattainable, but to say, come on now, we're 8 billion people on the planet. Let's do this thing.
Yeah, yeah. Good stuff. Good stuff. I'm gonna remain on my cell phone because the computer keeps coming in and out, and I just don't feel like dealing with that anymore. Okay, go on. Awesome. Thank you, Kurt, for that. That was valuable. I appreciate you. Can you hear me? Can you see
Yeah.
me?
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
we
can
hear you.
see.
Yeah. Fantastic. Fantastic. Who else has something? Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
Kind of quiet.
Go ahead. What did you say?
No, I just said it was kind of quiet. Kind of
Oh,
quiet.
it is kind of quiet. It is
Yeah.
kind of quiet. You know why? I'll tell you why.
Why? We
Because
thinking?
sometimes it's difficult for us to face our own when we abscond responsibility for our own lives. And it was most certainly challenging to admit that in a public forum. Lord have mercy, right?
Okay.
So here's what I'll say about that. Because I'm fond of giving you guys homework. And so here's what I'll say about that is you don't have to admit it to me. You don't have to admit it to each other. Maybe grab a piece of paper or a journal or something, and you can throw it away afterwards. You can burn it. You can flush it down the toilet, whatever the case may be. But I want you to get it out with the following journal prompt, which is where I give up my own responsibility and don't want to admit it is, okay, where I give up my own responsibility and don't want to admit it is, let me give you a couple of examples. I give up my responsibility in my marriage, in my relationship. I give up my responsibility, my authorship, right? My create ability in my money, in my finances, for example. And so the way that that looks could be sometimes it's up to the job or it's up to the economy or, credit is doing what it's doing or inflation is doing what it's doing or interest rates are doing what it's doing. Like there's some other variable out there that is somehow creating your experience versus who you say that you are. Because as we know, experiences, circumstances, laws, social mores, those have always been fluid throughout human life, throughout human civilization, throughout human experience. They've always been fluid. And while, yes, it is true that we move along with the times, there used to be a time in this country where half of us, the ones that are women, couldn't be here with men. It was seen as that's not men's business or that's not women's business or whatever the case may be. We don't live in those times anymore, right? In certain areas, there are still cultures that still uphold that. But when you understand that even with systemic external circumstances, you still have a say as to how you experience it, and that is your authorship, then it'll be easier for you to fill up those um, complete the sentence with those journal prompts. Where I give up my responsibility in my life is here, and I don't want to admit it. I don't want to up to that. I don't want to confess to that. Because that will allow you to start looking at and get curious about, where do I have some say? And I've been pretending that I don't. Where can I take some action? What can I do in this particular domain of my life? And I just haven't been willing to look. Because when you start asking those kinds of questions, as I've said before, questions are the creative acts of intelligence. And when you start asking questions from a place of curiosity, you start opening up possibilities that may have been there all along, but had you not asked the question, you would not have been open to it. Yeah. Who's willing to do that homework? Put one in the chat. Put one in the chat if you're willing to make that exercise for yourself. Yeah, yeah. Okay, awesome. And I want to invite you. Oh, yay. Okay. And I want to invite you to consider joining me for a special class that I will be teaching in a few days. I don't have the date on me, But I am teaching a free class called Upgrade Your Subconscious. And so make sure that you leave your email in the chat so that I can send you some information to it. And when you register for the class, you will get the recording as well. So I love that we're able to connect every week, Thursdays, for Spiritual Matters. Remember, of course, love yourself and your neighbor and the world. Give of your time, your energy, your responsibility. Laugh generously. Exercise. Remember that twerking is a Kundalini raising exercise. And eat more plant-based, stress less, sleep at least 7 to 9 hours, especially during the winter. And of course, always audit your assumptions. Check yourself before you wreck yourself. Thank you for your patience as we move through these network issues. And I will see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Doc.
Thank you.